That was from the trailer for The Irishman, the new film by director Martin Scorsese. It's available right now on Netflix. The plot summary online. I'm not going to read the IMDb plot summary because it's a little spoilery. I'll read you another plot summary. In the 1950s, truck driver Frank Sheeran gets involved with Russell Bufalino and his Pennsylvania crime family. As Sheeran climbs the ranks to become a top hitman, he also goes to work for Jimmy Hoffa, a powerful teamster tied to organized crime. So this is the Slash Filmcast, and joining us today for the first time, she is a professor of film at Whatcom Community College and a writer for Seattle Screen Scene. Melissa Taminga, welcome to the Slash Filmcast. How are you doing tonight, Melissa?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Great to have you on, and glad to have you join us for our review of The Irishman. This is a movie that has prompted a lot of capital D discourse even before the movie was even released. And of course, a lot of that discourse revolved around Martin Scorsese's thoughts on Marvel films. Now that the movie's out, it's available. Billions of people can stream it right now. I'm glad we get to take the movie on its own terms. There's so much to discuss. But Melissa, I guess let's just start with your overall thoughts on the film. What did you think of The Irishman?
Oh, wow. It's such a hard film to sum up, I think, in part because it took me a couple of watches to really decide what I think, but I ultimately did come out loving it, which kind of...
Wait, how many total hours do you have invested in this movie?
Just seven. Just
seven. Oh, okay.
And she only saw it twice. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. And I've had a sort of a complicated relationship with a number of Scorsese's films, particularly Goodfellas and something like Raging Bull, in part because I'm not always sure what to make of his depictions of the sort of abusive, criminal, destructive male behavior. And there's this kind of obsessive fascination with that behavior that feels kind of uncomfortable to me, especially when that behavior includes misogyny. I mean, in the end, I don't think Scorsese is endorsing that. He's ultimately an artist who's interested in human beings, but they can be really brutal films to watch, seeing women particularly abused, sidelined, objectified on screen by these bad but really fascinating men. And the films aren't really then either about the women or really interested in their stories. But I think one of the gifts of having a filmmaker like Scorsese, someone who's been working for almost 50 years, 45 years or so, is the way that his work kind of comments on itself. And The Irishman in some ways is like the anti-Goodfellas, which I do really appreciate Goodfellas, but I'm super uncomfortable with it. But I think if we don't see sort of the hollowness of Henry Hill's mobster life in Goodfellas because of all the glamour and the flashiness and the filmmaking is so fun, we see sort of that hollowness coming out in this film. So you have Goodfellas on the one hand, which is flashy, frenetic, invigorating, and then The Irishman, which is this long, sedate work, kind of patiently building what I think adds up to a lot of emptiness in the central character's life. And even the camera work and the editing feels really slow and patient. And so I was just really drawn into the contrast of those two things in a way almost in spite of myself. So I love that it depicts kind of mobster life. We see plenty of deaths, but none of these deaths are particularly exciting. There's a kind of rawness to it without being cathartic. And it feels like a kind of comment on the fascination even with violence in American films while not having that sort of, I don't know, finger-wagging self-righteousness that like a Michael Haneke Funny Games might have or something. And I also love that it is a film that it's a film that's about death in many ways, and yet the central characters constantly have to speak in euphemisms and pretend that that's not really what they're doing or what they're about. So it's a film about men who are dealing with death, but they can't really face their own death. And then I think maybe we'll get to a little bit of this later, but it is a film also that makes us feel, I think, the loss of women's stories and women's voices in the way that Goodfellas does not. And so ultimately, I just love the kind of arc that we're seeing of Scorsese's career. And I love the fact that he, at 77 years old, decided to make this 3.5-hour, super slowly paced film that is a follow-up to another long film that it's about these 17th century Jesuit priests. I mean, the kind of the fact that he chose to do something like that is just kind of a stunning commentary on just his dedication to tell the stories that I think he wants to tell. So I ended up loving it, but I kind of had to get there to work through it a little bit.
Fair enough. Yeah, it sounds like a journey there. But you make so many great points. One of them I want to call out is just the depiction of violence in this movie. I think is very interesting, as you say, because you could watch Goodfellas and interpret it as a condemnation of the gangster lifestyle. Right. I mean, I think it's very valid interpretation to come away from that movie and think gangsters are not cool. They end up in horrible situations. You know, their loved ones fall away from them. They're constantly living in fear, blah, blah, blah. And they have some great early times. But I think that, like, one of the iconic scenes from that movie is the murder of Billy Batts. And in that movie is the murder of Billy Batts. And it is set to Atlantis by Donovan, right? And even though the violence is horrifying, the fact that Scorsese has such a great ear for musical cues, you watch that scene and you're I don't know what other people's reaction is, but when I watch it, I'm like, wow, this is a beautifully rendered, mobster execution, right? Like it's beautiful the way this is done because of the way the camera is like overhead as he's strangling him to death, and there's this like music cue that plays, and one could interpret that as like glamorizing that kind of violence. Even if you come away from Goodfellas understanding that Scorsese's position, if one he could be said to have one, is that lifestyle is bad, you can watch a scene like that and like it can look cool. It can look like these people are badass and macho and alpha. That is not the case in The Irishman, in my opinion. Right? When you watch The Irishman and you watch the violence in The Irishman, it does not seem glamorous at all. It seems extremely monotonous, boring, soul destroying. You know what I mean? And so that's just like one aspect of the film that I feel like is a real, if not evolution, then certainly a marked difference from his earlier work.
Yeah, he doesn't even seem to linger on the details of it. In previous films, there's a look at this, watch fingers crushed in a vice. We will see it up close, the horrifying nature of what this is. And on one hand, that's gratuitous and seems to be potentially, glorifying it. On another, it is, look at this, look at it. It's horrifying, but don't turn away. This movie, it's abrupt. It comes out of nowhere. Almost every time it comes out of nowhere. It's over in a flash. It's pedestrian.
Yeah.
It is. There's nothing. There's no. It's almost always in a wide shot. There's no.
Good call about the wide shot. Like a lot of the times, you don't even see what's actually happening because it's so the angle is so wide, right? So yeah. So anyway, really interesting point about the violence in this film. Devindra, let's go to you. What are your thoughts on The Irishman overall?
Sure. I've only seen it once. I really want to have more time to dive into this movie. Yeah,
well, then
seriously.
your opinion is invalid, sir.
Yeah.
You know what? You only saw it once, but it felt like more than once, right?
It certainly felt like an experience. So I saw this at the Nighthawk Theater here in Brooklyn, not too far from my house. And I really appreciated being able to go to the theater and see that. I wish everybody had that opportunity. But I think also on Netflix, what was interesting over this past weekend is just seeing the discourse, like you were saying, Dave, like the fact that, this is a big, meaty, long movie that a lot of people are talking about. And I wonder if we would have had the same level of conversation with a typical release. I really like the movie. I don't know if I love it, but I think it's really interesting. And I really love movies that feel singular to the director. Like I think Scorsese is the guy. He is pretty much the guy who can make this movie, because this movie is sort of like, it is a reflection on the like glorifying mob stories he's told before, like Goodfellas, like Casino, and honestly, like even Wolf of Wall Street is in here, like the glorification of bad people. There's certainly condemnation in there, but probably not, maybe not as much as people sometimes realize. This movie is slow, it's pondering, it is about regret. This is a movie about, somebody at the end of their life coming to terms with the fact that what they did has destroyed their soul in a way. And so much of the movie is about that. I feel like the first 2 hours, it feels like something like a side story from Goodfellas. But then it gets to a point where we're seeing, this character in his older age more, and we're seeing the influence of the things he's done in his life and how that's affected his family. And I found that all really interesting. And the sort of things this character goes through towards the end, we'll talk about in spoilers, it does really relate a lot to silence. Like this idea of, holding faith and, I don't know, staying true to what you love. There is a lot going on there. I found it all really fascinating. This is what you would call a Shaggy movie, where it does feel like there's sometimes a lot of stuff where if this was a theatrical release fully, you probably would have cut like half an hour at least of this movie, because there are conversations that are interesting, but maybe not the most dynamic conversations I've ever seen in films. And I don't think they really unearth that much about these characters. It just feels like, this is background chatter, the sort of things we loved in Goodfellas, and honestly in Pulp Fiction and a lot of movies like this too. I don't feel like a lot of that was very revealing. We'll talk about the special effects and stuff. It didn't really bug me. There's one scene in particular where you clearly see that, oh man, this guy is not 30 something years old, just in the way he moves. And this is something I brought up. Huh?
One scene?
There's one scene in particular where he's forced to do something physical, and I think it's really apparent there, like, oh man, this is grandpa in a young suit, basically trying to push and shove somebody. Captain Marvel had this a lot too, so I think this is a really interesting, I don't know, consequence of this age-defying makeup, where they're de-aging the face. They can't de-age the movements and the bodies completely, or at least what the body is capable of. So I found that kind of fascinating too. But yeah, there's a lot to chew on with this movie. I really dug it.
Jeff Kanata, your thoughts on The Irishman?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts on The Irishman are best summed up in the form of a limerick. But I have to say, this is the first time that I feel a little silly doing it, because
the first time
we literally have a professor on, and she made some really good points. Yes. Very well articulated.
Very good. Very, very good.
And I was sitting there listening to that, looking at my limerick that I wrote.
No, Jeff, let me tell you something before you go on. Yeah. One of my favorite professors, English professors ever, currently writes limericks and posts them on social media, and he's an amazing writer. So do not degrade the limerick.
Okay, I'm not. What does that have to do with Jeff, though?
Yeah, I'm not degrading the form so much as. I mean, you're being very kind. You haven't heard the limerick yet. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Melissa. By the way, this guest spot is going really well so far. But anyway, Jeff, go on. What were you saying?
Yeah. So. I'm just saying, if I'd heard the last 20 minutes of discussion, I wouldn't have written this. But here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. At the risk of coming off lazy, this is a typically well-made Scorsese. Old ingredients, a good Italian combo, like my grandfather's beef bolognese.
That's delightful, Jeff. I thought there was going to be
great.
some I thought there was going to be like bodily functions or something really embarrassing there. Yeah. No, that's a charming limerick, Jeff.
That's practically a Gene Shalit quote. It's great.
Melissa broke down the movie and its social context. She watched it twice and she had all these insights. And I'm like, it kind of reminds me of my grandpa's cooking. But it does. I mean, I had a really interesting experience watching this movie, because it's the first of these that I've seen for the first time since having my kids. And I went, it's so interesting. I grew up
first of these, you mean Scorsese films, or
Scorsese films, sort of, Italian mobster movies, that sort of cultural Italian thing on screen. And I didn't grow up in the mob or anything, but this is the culture that I grew up in. My grandfather, my dad's dad, and my dad's mom his mom was conceived in Italy. My dad's dad, my grandfather, was born in Italy, lived there till he was 14. My aunts and uncles, that whole thing is what's in these movies. I mean, take out the sort of mobstery stuff, although supposedly I've heard stories, but that's neither here nor there. But like the food and the eating and the way people communicate and the kinds of faces and people in these movies, is my family. It is. I see my family in it very strongly, and it feels very familiar and warm to me. These movies, even though they're violent and they're horrible, and these people are horrible, there's the culture, the food, the kinds of decorations in their homes.
Basically, this movie is your Crazy Rich Asians, is what you're saying.
Yes, yes. And it certainly brings home the fact that representation on screen is important, isn't it? A touchstone. Even negative, representation in some senses. But the reason I bring that up is to say that my son and daughter are not going to have that at all. Like that's not. They're never going to know my grandparents. My dad and his cousins are a little bit like that. But I turned to my wife as we were watching this and I was like, the touchstone that I have to this is completely lost one generation later. Like my son and daughter are not going to feel that. It's just weird. I know this is a very self-indulgent way to go into this movie, but I was struck by that because I really enjoy Scorsese's indulgence in and it felt like classic Coke, it felt like classic Scorsese, like we're going back and sort of talking about his era, his childhood, the people in his world, it just felt like him doing his greatest hits a little bit. And I really enjoyed this movie. I made a lot of jokes as we were starting about the length of the movie, but I never felt long to me. It does feel slowly paced, but it feels intentional. It never felt plodding, or my mind never wandered. I was in it. And it's a strange thing. We'll talk more in depth about the de-aging of De Niro. I never bought that he was any younger than he is now at any point. But it's interesting to me how good he is on screen still. You watch him make a guest appearance on Saturday Night Live, and he can barely read the cue card, and he seems so awkward, and yet you put him on screen in a movie like this, and it's extraordinary. It's so real and grounded and connected, and Pesci's amazing in this movie as well. I mean, Joe Pesci, I haven't seen him in anything in a while, and it's just a reminder of how good he is. So it's fun to watch these actors work. It's fun to watch this filmmaker work. You guys were talking about how if this was released in the cinema, it would have to be much shorter. And I sort of had the inverse feeling where this feels to me like Scorsese with the gloves taken off, with the handcuffs taken off.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like
This is his Death Stranding.
Yes, exactly. There's no doubt to me that Goodfellas would have been 3.5 hours long if he could have done that, right? If he had a Netflix back then. Goodfellas would totally have been this length. This feels like him totally at home, comfortable, and we'll get to spoilers, but there is a very extended sequence toward the end of this movie that really is the climax, where he builds tension in such a masterful way, and it's slow and is nothing overtly said to you about what's going to happen or what even might happen. There's no overt threat. Really, it's just this pedestrian, matter-of-fact feeling of ominous tension, and it's so different than the way most movies do that. And I found it so interesting, and it is because he's allowed to indulge, he's allowed to slow things down and have long sequences. It's a fascinating movie, one I really, really enjoyed. I don't think it is on par with the Goodfellas for me, or even a Casino, but I think Melissa made such interesting points about how it's a more mature, different view of that same kind of material. And I think in its own way, it really stands beside those films as a different view into that mentality. And for that, I'm really glad we get it. I'm glad we get to see this movie in this medium. Like, it's such an interesting thing to give him the keys to Netflix and say, make whatever you want to make. And that could have totally failed, right? That could have, oftentimes when a tour gets no rules, gets a carte blanche, it feels like they benefited from previous films of having a frame and needing to work within a certain rule set. In this case, I think it actually created something extraordinary and really different. I liked it a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have to say, I was quite a fan as well because, as Melissa teed up, like this movie feels like a response to many of the films that he's made, specifically around the gangster lifestyle. It's interesting that he is the one filmmaker that is most closely associated with that genre, but the guy has such a diverse filmography. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does.
He's made Silence, Raging Bull, The Last Temptation of Christ. Bringing Out Your Dead, right? The Nicolas Cage movie.
Age of Innocence.
Age of Innocence. Like he's just, but it's just like no, like a lot of people think of him as the gangster filmmaker and
Comedian.
Kings of Comedy, right?
Yeah, Kings of Comedy. Yeah, that's what I mean.
King of Comedy, and so it's interesting that like that's the genre that kind of defines him. At the same time, this is kind of his response to that. This is kind of his answer to the question: what happens when those people get old? I think.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And
And it also feels like something only a filmmaker who's had this much experience, right? Like somebody who has lived a life can really look back at this. Maybe I don't know. I'm trying to think of like what movies about older experiences really get it right. Maybe The Old Man, The Gun. Feels like David Lowery did pretty well there, but this is so specific. It feels again only Scorsese could have really brought this movie together like this.
It's interesting, Dave, that you frame it that way because it occurs to me that the movie makes such a point over and over and over again to reveal to us all the people that didn't get old in the movie. It keeps telling us how these people died and when they died, and then the few that actually reach old age. It's an interesting.
It doesn't go great for them. It's not like they're living amazing lives. And I think like I'm gonna spoil the end of Goodfellas. So if you haven't seen Goodfellas, tune out for whatever. But the end of Goodfellas, it ends with Henry Hill is in the witness protection program, right? And he gets a newspaper from his front door. And then you kind of see these like guns. I think you see gunshots from Joe Pesci before it goes to credits, if I recollect correctly, because I saw the movie rather recently. And this movie answers the question, and then what? Like what happens to Henry Hill after like his life kind of stabilizes a little bit? And this is one version of that. Now, obviously, the main character of this movie doesn't go into witness protection. I'm not trying to say like it's a direct continuation or anything like that. But I'm just saying this movie asks the question, like when people rise and fall in the gangster genre, their lives don't end there. Sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. But sometimes they don't. Before we get to spoilers, the only other thing I want to mention, I read the Empire Online review about with Scorsese, which is very interesting. This is the interview, by the way, that spawned the Marvel dialogue. He makes his remarks about Marvel in the Empire interview, and it's interesting to read like that. Early on in his career, he really, really struggled. Like he really struggled to get things made. He had already made things like Raging Bull and King of Comedy, but like he struggled to get The Last Temptation of Christ off the ground. And it wasn't until The Color of Money in 1986 that things really started to turn around, according to this piece. Then he made Last Temptation of Christ and Goodfellas, and like really, like that's when it's like okay, that kind of catapulted him really into another level. But even up until this day, he could not get The Irishman made at one of the classic Hollywood studios. He had to get it done at Netflix because Paramount didn't want to pay the $175 to $200 million that this movie cost. And so this is a filmmaker who has always faced rejection and has always like had struggles to make his movies, even after the massive success and like medium defining career that he's had. So I think it's just both humbling to realize that, but also kind of like you're seeing a master at work when he's making this. I agree with Devindra. This is, in my he said shaggy. I would call it lumpy. I think it's kind of a lumpy film.
Yeah,
it's
old
like,
man lumpy.
It's like a pair of cargo shorts, kind of lumpy, So
I think you're just describing De Niro.
Yeah.
Melissa, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think like especially I would have said that on my first watch, but I really think that watching it a second time, all of these things are just click into place. I think thematically and just even plot wise and character references. So I don't know. I think I would have felt like it was Shaggy the first time, but the second time I honestly can't think of anything
I just don't think there's any way that I can watch this movie and think like, oh yeah, he was responsible for the Bay of Pigs, like that would be a thing that I thought was integral to the story. Anyway, we should get into spoilers soon, but your point is taken. I think a lot of people watch this movie and it's like telling Mozart like you should have used less notes. You know, I agree that like many people watch this and they find the length works for them. For me, it didn't. You know, I'm willing to revisit this movie again and go from there. But in any case,
let me ask you this question real quick. Dave, you saw this in a theater, right?
I saw this in a theater, and then I watched sections of it at home.
I wonder. I don't think there's a definitive answer to this question, but I wonder if there is a different feeling about the length when you watch it in the theater versus watching it at home.
Oh, definitely.
Because I did not have that feeling at all at home, but I also like paused it a couple times, got up and got some food, and came back and unpaused it. You know.
It was like what we talked about on the show last week, is making a sandwich and taking a dump. Those are the things you want to do when you're watching Scorsese movies.
Yeah. I had to prepare for this movie like Avengers Endgame, you know, like I had to like watch what I was drinking. I successfully did not have to run to the bathroom. And yeah, I'm also at a point in my life where I just like accept the fact that maybe during movies I really love, I have to run to the bathroom. Otherwise, I will not be able to keep watching it. Those are the calculations you do seeing a movie in the theater.
Yeah, it's more stressful. It's more stressful.
Yeah.
So anyway, agreed, Jeff. It's a very different experience, and I think you really feel the length. And maybe, but that's obviously part of the point, is you're supposed to feel the length because you're feeling the length of this person's lifetime and his series of decisions and reflecting on them with him. Anyway, the nesting doll experience of the narrative is kind of interesting. It's like almost like reminded me a little of like The Prestige, you know, like you start like later in this person's life, and then
like
you flash
2 flashbacks deep, like 5 minutes into this movie.
Not 3 flashbacks deep, I would say. You go back in time, then you go back in time again, then you go back in time again. So it's like, wow, you're 3 flashbacks deep, like 10 minutes into the movie. So anyway.
And you know that time slows down when you go 3 levels deep.
Yeah, exactly. So in any case, let's get to spoilers for The Irishman starting right now. I want to talk a little bit about the digital de-aging. Melissa, how convinced were you that we were seeing old Robert De Niro and slightly less old Robert De Niro?
I think it doesn't really work in the sense that you're not thinking about the fact that it is like makeup and de-aging. But I think I kind of
you mean you do think about it, like when you're watching it, you're thinking about it, and if it was working well, you wouldn't be thinking about it, right?
Well, no, I mean I think I was thinking about it, but something about the thinking about it worked for me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this is kind of it's like this, like you were saying about it being nested. It's like this old man thinking about back on his life, and in a way there is this old man contained in the young man, and the physicality of that I think is really interesting. And I don't know if that was Scorsese thinking, oh great, it won't look exactly like they're young, and this will be perfect, but
we won't have this grosser fight go on too long, just long enough.
Exactly. But I think it really worked for me because I think the film is about this man who when we see him from the beginning of his mobster career, as it were, he looks like an older man. Like death is contained in him when he even starts.
It's such a cool way to look at it. That's such a very, very cool perspective.
I think Bilge Iberi actually had the same opinion about this at Vulture. I don't know if you saw, he had a piece called "How is the de-aging in The Irishman incredibly impressive?" He actually makes a point that that because of the fact that it's old De Niro in there, that gives the movie some point, like because the de-aging is not convincing, that is what makes the movie have its power, is because it feels more like basically like De Niro wearing an incredibly impressive like digital mask versus.
I don't think it's even that impressive, honestly.
Well,
it's not that impressive. I think the old age stuff that they do is very good, but at no point there's a couple of moments at the beginning where they're like, "Hey kid, come in here. And I'm like, "Kid,
45."
I mean, he's supposed to be that old. He's supposed to be that old already. This is not like Henry Hill age person, right? He's already 45 at the beginning of the, in the youngest point in the movie. So, putting aside the World War, I think, 2 part or whatever it was, But
Oh, yeah.
putting that aside, I mean, he's already supposed to be 45, so he's not supposed to be that young. But that being said, Jeff, I mean, I agree with you. Like, it didn't really work for me. Like, I was extremely distracted to the film's detriment, in my opinion. But there's many people, more than one person at this point, have now made the claim that, like, actually the fact that it's the old De Niro in there, that actually makes the movie better than if, for instance, they had gotten a young body double and put De Niro's face on him, right?
I mean, I think the
Yeah.
way Melissa expressed it, like containing an old man, containing that sort of note of entropy, that
Mhm,
that
mhm.
death, that looming death is always there. I mean, I don't want to say De Niro is close to death. I'm not implying that, but it's such a fascinating perspective, and I think it changes my negative feelings about it, because I think that it did have an impact. But physically, he's just not up to the task but it didn't ruin the movie for me in any sense. It just felt like,
It was
who
a
you guys
distraction. It was a distraction.
who do you
for me.
think you're kidding? Like, who
Yeah.
do you think you're fooling here? You're not fooling anybody. But I think perhaps giving the movie a bit of more credit in light of what Melissa said, maybe they didn't intend to fool anybody. Maybe that's the whole point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
I
I
feel
think.
like Mhm.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, I mean, just there's a sense of fatedness that hangs over the entire thing too. This kind of, it's like this determinism, and they are all headed toward this journey that they can't escape. And then that final shot that's where we were heading the whole time. But
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Devendra.
I mean, yeah, that determinism, I think, is a good way to put it. It's interesting to me that this whole movie is basically people making these decisions, and certainly De Niro's character, of just like, escalating bad things. Like, oh, I want to be friends with this guy. I'm going to steal some of this meat and get it over to him, and gets to a point where they reveal he basically has killed people in the army, in service. Like, so that aspect of his soul has kind of been killed off already.
Mhm.
So being asked to kill somebody is no big deal. It's all just kind of like
Right.
another job. It's another day at work,
Right.
basically. And that whole perspective that they go through is really interesting. I do think the idea that, death is contained within them, it's very poetic. I'm not sure if it's always the best explanation for what we're seeing, but I feel like any solution, we talked about this during Doctor Sleep, right? Certain things that happened in that movie could have involved, digital recreations, or what that movie did. And that's either cast younger actors or do this de-aging. And both sides, I think we clearly see upsides and downsides. This is really interesting. This movie made me think of another soon-to-be classic of cinema, Gemini Man. Another movie where,
If it's not a classic yet, just keep waiting.
it will be. Trust me. That's another movie about an older actor, certainly not as old as De Niro, but Will Smith confronting his younger self, and kind of like, the regret he's lived as an assassin too. Like these movies are kind of related in that way. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, so it sounds like mixed bag, the de-aging was for us. I'm in the camp of, it's a distraction. The scene that we were all talking about earlier was the scene when Robert De Niro, as his younger 45-year-old self, is supposed to brutalize someone at the butcher shop, I think it was, right? Like, he's supposed to, like, go and kick this guy's ass, and it just does not look convincing. It looks painfully unconvincing, actually. And that kind of stuff, it does kind of take me out of the film, Like, I want to not be thinking about, like, if they had used a younger person for just that scene. I'm not even saying the whole movie, just that scene, because
That's
you
what
want
we have some people for. Yeah.
You want
Yeah.
to retain De Niro's performance, like the facial expressions and all that stuff. But for the physicality, sometimes it just doesn't work, and that is a disappointment for me. I know for some people it worked, and that's cool. So,
Can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah.
The framing of the film as a discussion in his old age
Mm-hmm.
to someone someone we don't know, like the idea that the movie starts as this confessional to nobody.
Yeah,
and
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I wonder, Melissa, as somebody who watched the movie twice, how you feel about that, because by the time we get back to him at that age, it's pretty clear there is no one. There is no
Yeah.
one that he's unloading this to. And it felt to me like a strange loose end or unpaid off bookend in some way. That it just didn't feel. It's like, why did we need that at the beginning to get us here? I don't
Yeah.
know. How did you feel about it?
I mean, I had two thoughts about that. I mean, I think one thing is I just wondered initially if he was thinking of the book, because isn't the
Mm.
original book the reporter or the writer who was interviewing
Yes.
the real character? So I just kind of wondered if that was sort of the setup.
Yeah.
But then I also feel like there is so much in this film that is related to Catholicism and faith and the whole idea of God. And I just kind of want the whole idea of confession, I think, ties to maybe who is he speaking to? I mean, is he speaking to God or is there no one there? And then that whole scene at the end where he and the priest are talking with each other, and then the priest ends up leaving and he's just there by himself looking out. Is there anyone there or not? Which kind of has an interesting tie back to there's a shot of Peggy in the middle of the film when she is looking through the door at her father getting his guns together to go shoot. I can't remember what. Oh, he's going to shoot Crazy Joe, I think. But it's like this idea of Peggy. In some ways, I feel like she is sort of a conscience or a God kind of figure, and is it God through the door? I mean, I just feel like there is something about speaking to God or speaking to the nothingness that he's playing with there. That really kind of works for me.
That is a very charitable interpretation. Another interpretation could be they just started with this framing device of this guy telling the story to an author and just kind of jettisoned it by the end of the film. They just kind of forgot about it by the end of the film. But I think the way you put it is also very good. I think like I have some issues with the way that this movie invokes the idea of truth, and I guess now would be a good time to talk about that. Like, we've already talked about how we all think overall the movie is pretty good, but in case people don't know, basically none of the film is true in terms of like who killed Jimmy Hoffa, who killed the person in the Umbertos, right? Crazy Joe, right? Crazy Joe Gallo.
Right.
There's basically like no truth to any of it, according to people who are conversant and knowledgeable about the thing. And Slate.com has a great article called "The Lies of the Irishman" that lays bare how this book that this movie is based off of, called "I Heard You Paint Houses," is a festival of lies. And that, and I should also point out, like, in general, I understand movies need to take creative liberties, right? Like, I think it was the Steve Jobs movie with Aaron Sorkin, where like one of the people who was in the movie, like whose life was chronicled in the film, said to Aaron Sorkin after he came out of watching it, like, none of that happened, all of it was true. Like he's saying like those events did not actually take place, but that Aaron Sorkin was able to capture a certain essence of what actually happened. This is not that at all. This does not even capture the essence of what happened, right? This is just like all complete lies. And so I think that I'm only bothered by it, but to one degree, which is that I don't think you can invoke truth and then like tell a story that's just completely lies, because like, Jeff, you pointed out at various points in the movie, it's like, hey, Joe Smith died of old age, or a nail bomb exploded under his car at the age of 33, whatever. And the implication there is these are real people, right?
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that, because I mean, yes, of course, these are real people, and Jimmy Hoffa's a real person, and these are, we're talking about Kennedy, and this is a history that is the canvas upon which the story is told. But I feel like that same kind of thing happens in Goodfellas, where it's like, Jimmy 2 times he was killed in 30 years later or whatever. It's like, it's just this showing the consequences of this life. It's not like here are facts that are.
Well, A, I disagree with how it's presented in the film, and B, Goodfellas is way more truthful about what actually happened to those people. Like, Goodfellas could be arguably seen as a almost nearly completely truthful doc. Like, it takes some liberty, certainly, but like most of the facts are true in Goodfellas. So I actually don't think this qualifies as like being similar to Goodfellas.
I just don't think that I just didn't approach this movie as showing me a chronicle of an authentic
Yeah.
set of events. It just felt like it felt like it was using history as a canvas upon which to tell a fictional story to me. But
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people view it that way. You know, I think I'm just saying if it had been completely like more like Shakespeare, I think is what you're saying, right? Like
yeah,
Shakespeare uses
Yeah.
like real life
Yeah, yeah.
figures, right? Yeah, I mean, I guess I could buy that argument, but and I think that I haven't seen a lot of people saying like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this movie reveals who killed Jimmy Hoffa." You know, I think like a lot of people are going into it with the correct amount of skepticism. It just kind of gets my goat a little bit when they invoke real life history, but then like the movie is just complete fabrication. It's not even like 80% true, and they took some liberty. It's like 10% true. You know what I mean?
This
Like
goes back to our review of that Transformers movie where they faked the moon landing because they found a Transformers there. And Jeff never, Dave, you never let that go.
yeah,
basically.
this is about as truthful as that. You know, so but
Exactly.
I don't think but it has the veneer. You know, it has the veneer of truth to it. Anyway,
Yeah.
I
we
did
don't need
think
to
it
talk
was
about it
weird
anymore.
that they.
Yeah.
It did think it was weird that they said that Bumblebee killed Jimmy Hoffa.
It was
I thought
weird. That was an odd moment in the show. Anyway,
That explained
it's
a
clear
lot.
none of you share my concern with this, but I would
No,
not be able
I
to.
hear you. I do think a
Yeah.
lot of people watching this movie may come away with that idea, and that's it. Like just to see this thought in their head that's planted, and it's like, oh, that's what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, and I'm going to go on and live my life. There's something not great about that. The movie does feel like it's trying to be as a document, as a historical document, as something like Goodfellas, even.
Let me ask you
yeah.
this, Dave. Do you have the same beef with JFK, the Oliver Stone film?
I guess it's hard for me to answer that question because, I guess maybe I wasn't around really. I wasn't really commenting on movies when that movie came out, so I don't know what the dialogue around it was.
Entirely conspiracy theories, basically.
Right.
yeah.
Exactly.
So then the answer to your question is yes.
I mean, because I think that movie. I mean, that movie actually thinks it's telling the truth. I don't think Scorsese thinks he's actually revealing anything. I think Oliver Stone did think he was revealing everything, but
Yes.
and it was also a pack of horse shit. You know, it was. but I kind of take both those movies in the same vein of like, yeah, this is a fun use of this actual historical event to tell, kind of a yarn, weave a yarn.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if this movie was done using completely made up characters, you know, like there is no Jimmy Hoffa, there is no actual real life people, I'd be like, great, no issue with it whatsoever. But they use these real characters because I think they want to invoke this veneer of truth that it does not live up to.
But it's a tantalizing mystery, right? Who killed Jimmy Hoffa is a tantalizing mystery that's real and is a fun jumping off point for speculation and fiction, right?
That this movie adds nothing to the conversation in terms of the actual.
In the same way that JFK is just as fanciful, you know. But I think I probably could think of 3 or 4 other films that do this similar things with historical events where. And you brought up Shakespeare, right? I mean, Richard III was nothing like that. There was actual Richard III, right? But I think historical fiction is an entire genre that is. I think it's a little weird for you to paint that entire concept as deceitful or misleading. I don't think that anybody's attempting to convince you of this history.
All right. Well.
Yeah.
Agree to disagree, but I did want to. Yeah, let me just say one last thing about it, which is that I think it is this article is really good and it's really fascinating. And what's hilarious about this article in Slate, which we'll link to in the show notes, is that there is a guy who actually did research, interviewed hundreds of people for the book. Oh, and he says, quote. Truthfully, I'm upset because I spent my entire career investigating this case, interviewed over 1,000 people, and I have a legitimate claim to having made an important contribution. And then a guy who wrote a one-source book based on the word of a convicted felon and proven liar gets everything. The best-selling book, the movie star treatment that comes to very few, but every author wants. Yes, I am bitter about this. End quote.
That guy should be angry. I feel like that guy deserves to.
I am mildly angry on his behalf. That's all I have to say.
I hear you.
But I feel like, what's the difference between? I mean,
any depiction, any biopic has the same issues, right?
Yeah, Ford versus Ferrari, right? I mean,
Sure.
I just simply don't agree with what you're saying, because I think that like those movies, even if they took liberties and changed facts and blended some characters into one, they fundamentally were trying to get at some truth of those stories. And this
But-
movie just is not. It is complete fabrication. Like it's not. It's Ford versus Ferrari. That race actually occurred. You know what I mean?
We know the difference here is that this is about a mystery. This is about a mystery that no one is ever going to get to the discernible truth of. So the movie inherently is talking about something that is speculative.
Maybe if it was more like Zodiac, though. Like Zodiac is inherently about an unsolvable crime.
Great
right?
example of
And
how to handle
Zodiac
that situation.
is the movie of a very long movie about this slog to solve this mystery. The trouble with this movie is that it's presenting the answer to you directly.
Everyone just needs to make a Zodiac is really the solution.
Yeah.
But don't you think it's partly a commentary on Frank himself? I mean, I think there is some level of how much is he supposed to be kind of a reliable narrator in that sense? How much do we take of what he's saying is kind of through the lens of his memory, and how much is he, just considering what he did more important than it actually was? And I just think, this movie isn't really about Jimmy Hoffa. I mean, it's about Scorsese reflecting on gangster movies.
Yeah.
Really?
First of all, I'm happy to move on to another topic. But do not interpret my moving on as I agree with you on this point.
I was half expecting, by the way, at the end of the movie, I was half expecting somebody to be like, "So, Frank, do you expect me to believe this?" Like, is any?
I do think
expecting somebody to say something like that.
I do think that like one of the most moving scenes, the scene in this movie that completely brought the movie home for me. And I still like the movie despite having some problems with it. But the scene that brought them is when the priest is talking with him at the end, and he's trying to like convince him to confess. And Frank is just like, I don't even know. He's like trying to feel bad about his crimes is the best way I can describe it. And he doesn't. He cannot summon guilt or remorse. And that is just, even at the end of his life, even like no one gives a shit what he's saying or not saying. Like, even when he has nothing left, he has no one left. He can't. His sense of being a person of conscience has just completely departed from him. It's absolutely tragic. It is like heartbreaking. That
Also,
scene, that performance, it's amazing. So
also that phone call. I feel like that phone call was also another one where it's like that is so hard
To
of
Joe.
him. Yeah, to Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, of like.
Oh yeah. When
that is rough.
When it's like he's
doesn't
trying to come
know.
to terms with it. Like something in this person's brain is fundamentally broken, right? Like and you're seeing like the machinery of his mind just short circuit in front of you. It's an amazing performance by De Niro here, and it's just like. For those scenes alone, it's like that is worth the 3.5 hour journey, in my opinion. So,
and it's interesting too, looking at De Niro's career. I don't have it in front of me, but it feels like the last decade has been almost a parody of himself, and kudos to him for like taking divergent things and doing comedies and I think that's kind of cool, and that he's willing to play around with his persona a lot, but the fact that he's still capable of this is amazing to me. Like that's the De Niro of the 70s and 80s. That's the kind of powerhouse performances that made him into one of America's great actors, and it's still there. He still has it. It was really cool to see.
Yeah. The thing about that phone call, by the way, another element. This is a guy coming from a generation that doesn't know what to do with their feelings, and certainly men knowing what to do with their feelings. So a guy trying to console the wife of a friend who he happened to kill. In this story, there is so much going on in that scene. Like, I found that pretty enticing and compelling. Yeah.
And he does actually make, in that scene with the priest that you're talking about, Dave, he actually has that line, "What kind of man makes a phone call like that?"
Yeah.
Like the priest, and it is stunning because he knows that there's a problem in his soul, right?
Yeah.
But he doesn't know how to fix it.
it is really profound. And speaking of amazing performances, Jeff, you've already talked about how good Pesci is in this movie.
Yeah, he's so good.
First of all, it's amazing. Pesci has basically been in retirement for many years.
Yes.
According to the New York Times, quote, he went into semi-retirement to focus on jazz under the pseudonym Joe Dogs, as well as his family and golf.
As one does.
As one does. Even Louis C.K. at the height of his pre-scandal fame couldn't coax Pesci to work with him. Instead, Pesci told him he should quit doing stand-up because he wasn't funny, end quote. So,
Pesci,
like, he was out of the
Pesci
game.
Ahead of the curve.
So Pesci was out of the game, and then he was brought back for this extremely restrained performance. One of my disappointments with the film, actually, is that, like, I feel like when Al Pacino arrives as Jimmy Hoffa, like, that whole relationship just, like, dominates the film. And I thought, like this Joe Pesci friendship with Robert De Niro's character felt like it was such a critical part of Robert De Niro's character's life, and I felt a little disappointed we didn't see more of Joe Pesci because he's so good in this movie. There's a moment when he's like cooking salad in a kitchen and he's like, "Don't call him," you know, and I'm just like, chills down my spine.
He is amazing. He deserves an
Yeah.
Academy Award nomination for this,
Yeah.
I think. And he's so good, and it's so different. It's like if you cast this movie in your head, you cast De Niro as that character,
Right?
You know,
Yeah.
you don't cast Pesci as that character, and he's so good. And as you said, restrained and just in command at all times. There's that scene at the wedding where he pulls him aside and he's like, it's what it is. You know, like that whole not saying it.
That's an amazing conversation.
It's incredible. And I also want to talk a little bit about the entire sequence that leads up to the Hoffa killing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that's so good.
Oh, dude, the breakfast with Pesci where he's like, you're gonna get on a plane, and like how it slowly dawns on him everything that's happening, the car ride, the shots of him just like getting into the plane, getting out of the plane, like how just fucking pedestrian it all is, just how mundane and matter of fact everything is. And then they put the dude's son is the dude that picks him up. Like
so brutal.
Yes, it is so messed up. And he doesn't know that was gonna happen. He's like, "What are you here for?" And then he has to sit next to him the whole time. It's like,
and we talk about fish for a while. Yeah.
And like how blithely unaware Hoffa is, where he's just like chewing people out, not realizing he's about to get whacked. It's brutal. And then back in the car, back in the plane, then back in the car with Pesci, and nothing said.
They say nothing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so
one of my favorite parts of that scene, by the way, is Pesci saves him cereal at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like he
pours it for him.
He pours it for he saves it, he pours it like a good big brother, basically. Like it's so
grandpa.
caring. Yeah.
Dude, that whole sequence is, I think, masterful. It is so tense, and why is it like it is?
Yeah. There's no music or anything like that. Like it's not
no
like
music.
There's no turning of the screws. It's just
Yeah.
showing you the steps that it takes to do this.
Yeah.
And in showing you are completely invested and completely emotionally wrung out by the whole thing. And then getting there, and the dude is like putting plastic down on the floor, and then when they get back and those guys are gone and he has to do it himself, it's like, oh man.
There's also the scene when he opens the door and Jimmy Hoffa walks in and he looks at the living room. There's no one there. I felt like that scene was he knows, but I felt like it was a callback to the scene in Goodfellas when Joe Pesci's character is executed, right? Like he's about to get made. He opens the door and then you see nothing, just a living room. It's like the last thing you see before you die.
So it's so heartbreaking. His whole like, why didn't you come here at 2? You said you were going to be here at 2.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's like, sorry, we had to do some things. He's like, no, but you said you were going to be here at 2. Like everybody knows that you have to be on time in my life. And I trust, so good. So
and
good.
Hoffa has that line too earlier on when he says, I want to be able to trust someone who won't knife me from behind. And just when he turns and his back is to Frank, and that's
shoots him in the back.
Shoots him in the I
don't think you even see it when he first does it. That's how, like, we were talking about wide angle shots.
Right?
Like he's like obscured by the
door.
You don't really see him.
Yeah. So
I have a question for you about that. There's at the very, very beginning of the movie, Frank says, I paint houses. There's a cut to a gun, and then he shoots someone. Is that Hoffa? I think it's like in the first 2 to 3 minutes of the movie.
Interesting. I don't know. That would take a second viewing for sure.
Yeah.
Another viewing.
I think it is, but
I don't know.
Yeah.
So Melissa, let me ask you a question. We have been talking about some of the discourse around the movie, and actually, you had a really pretty brilliant Twitter thread about this topic that I wanted to ask you about. There's been a lot of conversation about Anna Paquin's role in this film and how she has almost no lines in this movie, and a lot of people complaining that Martin Scorsese, not generally somebody that particularly in the gangster movies, or actually let me restate that. Been a lot of talk about how in this movie the role of women is completely subsumed. Like, for instance, as an example, Robert De Niro's character divorces his wife in an offhanded statement, earlier on in the film, right? So
and they all go bowling together. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like the movie kind of like almost nearly erases women's role from the story. And Anna Paquin has almost no lines, and there's a lot of criticism, like, why have Anna Paquin, a very talented actress, to appear in this film if she's not going to get to say anything? And I think Mark Kermode said it really well. I was listening to his review of this film, and he's like, a lot of people criticize Anna Paquin for not having, or the role, or Martin Scorsese or the writer Steven Zaillian for not giving Anna Paquin's character any lines. But in a sense, not speaking is a big part of what she's supposed to do in this film.
Sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And
that is the role.
The role is not speaking, and it is the fact that she is not speaking that is it drives kind of this point home of the damage that the character has done to his family. But
it's pure judgment. It's pure that disconnect is so important. It reminds me, especially towards the end, it is sort of like the depiction, I think, of the Madonna in classic Christian art or Catholic art too, right? It's you get a lot of that. It's silent judgment, and that kills him inside. And there's that scene in the bank that I feel like really drives that home too, right?
Yeah, very good. So, Melissa, your thoughts on Anna Paquin's role and the role of women more generally in this film?
Yeah. So going into it again, I was just so suspicious. I'd heard, of course, some of the discourse without trying to be too spoiled by it, but I'd heard again, there's no lines, and people are saying, no, she's really important, her role, and so I was very suspicious of it, and I think probably even 3 hours into the movie, I was still not sure I was on board with the fact of how sidelined really the women are. But I think the film is the women are excluded, but that is a part of the condemnation, I think, of Frank and of this whole mobster lifestyle. And the film very carefully does show us that these women are here. So even that opening, the beginning scene, right, where Frank and Russell are going on this car trip with their wives, Renee and Carrie, the wives initially, I think, seem a little bit petty. They keep wanting to stop, but and then there are but we know that they're there. They're part of it. And then of course we have Peggy and the constant watching that she's doing, and that really great scene too with Joe Hoffa when she's sitting in the car and she's afraid to turn on the key. But all these things didn't really convince me that that was justified, that women were really not a part of the film. I think until that scene with Frank's daughter, who I had to look up her name on IMDb. It's Dolores. She has really barely been in the movie at all, but Frank is sitting across from her, and he's upset that Peggy has rejected him essentially at the bank. And he says, I did this basically because I was trying to protect you. And her face is just, are you kidding me? And it's basically, her face is kind of some of the only, I think, real emotion that you see in a way in the film. All of the men are so impassive. They're so disconnected from their emotions and their feelings and everything that they're doing. And yet she is sitting there and you see her face crumpling, and she says, you have no idea what it was like for us. And I think that in that moment, the sort of the film's exclusion of the women hits home, and we're made to feel it. We're made to feel the loss of their stories, the loss of their perspectives, and and then for me, it was thinking back through all of the rest of the film and thinking, this is what we don't know what Carrie and Irene were saying to each other on the trip. We don't know what Joe's story is. We don't know what Peggy's story is, and that's part of the whole dark tragedy of these men who think what they're doing is so important, and yet they're cutting off, the people that are so close to him. Now, all of that said, I mean, I think the film is judging the men for that, and maybe even being a commentary on all gangster films that have excluded women in that ways and sidelined them. And so I'm not sure if a film that excludes women in order to make a point about excluding women is that like justifying it.
Yeah.
Is it perpetuating the thing that's condemning? But at the very least, I mean, I think the film is honoring that point, and there's an acknowledgement of the loss of women and their voices, and I really appreciate that. So I'm going to go with it because I think that it is kind of you have to do it to tell this particular story about
I think
Frank.
that's really well put. And by the actress who plays Dolores is Marin Ireland, by the way.
Yes,
She's great in Sneaky Pete.
Sneaky Pete. She's
yeah.
also in Hell or High Water, so you might have seen her in those things. But I mean, with that one speech, you kind of get a glimpse of like, what are all these other stories that were never told, right? Basically, like, if you made a movie about her life, it would be like a dramatically different movie. It might be a horror film. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's like a really profound moment in the film, and I don't know that I don't know that I fully agree with you in terms of like that is the point, like the movie consciously making that point, but I think it's really there's certainly enough evidence to like back you up that that's the case, and the performance by Marin Ireland really brings it home. So anyway, thank you for sharing that with us, Melissa. And I think like we're about out of time here. Does anyone have any other pressing things they want to bring up about The Irishman before we wrap up here?
I just specifically want to call out, I mean, we talked a bit about Pesci and De Niro, but Pacino in particular too. Like, this is a really interesting role for him because it's not against type. It is very much like taking that manic Pacino energy and sort of like his magnetism and pumping it up and showing him as a guy that could like get a ton of people to follow him, and him being potentially somebody who could be president one day. There's so much joy to his performance too. Like that meeting in Miami, the give no fucks way he just goes about life. I think he embodies really, really well. And we've lived through, talk about the past decade for De Niro, the past decade for Pacino has not been great. So, like,
not a Jack and Jill fan, it sounds like, Devendra.
Not a Jack and Jill fan. That Dunkachino commercial, is it that movie?
Yeah, it's that movie. Yeah. I'm
never gonna forget that.
You're never gonna buy Dunkachino again, I think.
Never again. Never again. But I love him in this movie, and I love that. It's finally a movie where they can all kind of be together, and also with Scorsese too. Like this is like such a dream team moment. It's funny, like for all of his talk about superhero movies, this is basically the mobster superhero team.
Even Keitel shows up.
Keitel's here.
He's great. Like one or two lines that he has.
Yeah, I wanted more Keitel.
More Keitel. But speaking of Keitel, speaking of Pacino, the last thing I want to say about this movie is like I love the use of language in the film. And Melissa, you alluded earlier to how like a lot of euphemisms are used, and like
yes,
I'll say the first time I went to a casino, it was Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut, and I was joining a table to play poker, and even just the system that they have to like get people onto poker tables, it's like like they'll use your initials and they use the table number, and they'll be like, lock it up for DC at table 12. Like this whole like language to communicate all this stuff in shorthand, and like I just find it intoxicating to like even just that, to like learn like what subcultures languages are, and I think this movie definitely gives you a lot of that. I mean, the phrase "it's what it is" is said, I think, 15 times during the course of this film, and it's fascinating but also chilling. I'm kind of like, what is the etymology of like "it's what it is"? How did they decide this is what it means when they say they're going to kill you? You know what I mean? Like, I'm fascinated. Like, when he says it, everyone knows that's what it is, right? Like everyone knows that's what that means, and I just find that fascinating.
Basically saying the decision has been made.
Right.
You
right.
know,
Yeah,
it's basically what
yeah.
they're saying is
Yeah.
that there's no changing this decision.
Right.
It's
Well,
what
it wasn't.
it is.
It wasn't. Yeah. The decision was like, if you don't stop, something terrible will happen.
No, it's
Like-
what it is happens.
It's like a done.
It's done.
No,
We've
no, no.
decided that if you've got 0 more chances.
Yeah. Well, it was threatening Al Pacino, like, you need to stop what you're doing,
Right.
or else you will be killed. I don't think it was your.
Yeah.
That was my interpretation. Is like, he was not completely dead yet, but if he doesn't stop, he's gonna die, and that's why Al Pacino's like, they wouldn't dare. You know,
They
like,
wouldn't dare. Yeah.
And so, but anyway, I love the language of this film and how it's used and what it means to the characters and how they feel the significance of it. So, just wanted to shout that out as well. Anyway, Melissa, we have kept you a little bit longer than we promised, so I want to wrap things up here. You can find more episodes of this podcast at /filmcast.com. Email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. This episode was edited by Beatty Zhang. And stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Melissa, where can people find more of your work on the internet?
I'm on Twitter at @1AprilDay, and I also write for Seattle Screen Scene.
Thank you so much for joining us, Melissa. Jeff Canada, where can we find more of your work on the internet?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Kanata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T. I have a video game podcast where I talk about video games. You can find that at 5by5.tv/DLC. I also do a live play Dungeons and Dragons show. We are right around 3.5 hours an episode as well, but lots of excitement, lots of fun. A really cool episode last week where a character fell in love with a werewolf. If you're into that, check it out. It's really good. I'm super proud of it. So find that as a podcast anywhere you get podcasts by searching for The Dungeon Run. You can find it on YouTube as well by searching there for The Dungeon Run, or you can watch it live as we record it Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific time at caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run.
Devindra Hardwar.
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Devindra, and I write about tech at Engadget.com. Also, check out the Engadget podcast because I'm co-hosting that.
And this week on Culturally Relevant, which is my weekly interview/discussion show, I talk with the man who played the Peloton husband in that viral Peloton ad. This is not a joke. I did interview Sean Hunter, who plays the Peloton husband, and it was a fun chat. So check that out at culturallyrelevantshow.com. Next week, we'll be reviewing Uncut Gems, the new film by the Safdie brothers, starring Adam Sandler. So check that movie out in theaters. It'll be going wide. Uncut Gems is a movie. I'm really looking forward to this chat about the movie next week on the podcast. Hope people will join us for it. Thanks for listening to the /Homecast. We'll see you next week. All right, we're still broadcasting live, Melissa, but this part will be cut out of the recording.
Okay.
But thank you so much for joining us. That was awesome.
You were
And
amazing. That
yeah.
was so great.
Oh, thank you so
you
much.
are amazing. You are amazing.
Oh,
That's
thank
great.
you.
Yeah, that was phenomenal.
Yeah,
You
I
guys
really
are
enjoyed
phenomenal.
you're
it.
really easy to talk to. Super fun.
Oh, awesome. So not amazing. Easy to talk to. No, I'm just
you
joking.
are
Like anybody
also
else.
Amazing.
I'm just joking. Melissa, it's been a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye.
Yep. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, folks. Anything we need to do? I think we're ready to go to the first part.
Let's do
Yep.
it.
All right, here we go. So I want to try to do like 15 minutes and then an ad, and then 15 minutes and then an ad, and then into the review, and then we'll be good.
Cool.
So however long those take. Here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the /Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and joining me are...
Devindra Hardwar.
And Jeff Kanata.
Welcome to the show, everyone. What we're going to do here on today's podcast is we're going to discuss some what we've been watching and then move on into an in-depth review of The Irishman. We got Melissa Taminga joining us for that review. It's going to be a good one. You can find more episodes of the /Filmcast at /Filmcast.com. Email us at /Filmcast@gmail.com. And email us as well. A lot of people do every single week. I wanted to read this email from Logan from Atlanta this week, who writes into /Filmcast@gmail.com with a very good question. He writes in, quote, longtime listener here, I have a topic that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. I've seen a couple of worst of lists pop up on Twitter recently, and I'm curious where you three stand on lists like that. Personally, I think they're a waste of time and completely unnecessary. I think it's so much more valuable to discuss why good things are good and giving attention to the art that you think deserves the attention. Worst of lists seem to do the opposite. That's not to say I don't think criticism is okay. It most definitely is. I simply feel like some people think discussing film is to discuss what is wrong with the film and not the other way around. I hope I've articulated this clearly because I'm still working through my thoughts on the matter. Love to hear what you think of this. Been a listener for a while, and I look forward to listening to your show every week. Thanks so much for what you guys do. P.S. Please do another Slash Filmcast meetup in Decatur. I moved here after the last one and was disappointed. I missed out on Devindra and other listeners. So, Logan, I guess, let us know if we can pass your email address on to the Decatur folks. But good question, Logan. Let's start by asking you this, Jeff Kanata. Did you ever do Worst Of at Totally Rad Show?
No.
Yeah.
We never did Worst Of.
I assume that would go against the title of the show and the ethos of the show, probably, right?
Well, I think at the end of the year we would each name like a most disappointing, just a single most disappointing, like something we were really, really looking forward to that didn't live up. But I don't think there's really much. I agree with the emailer. I don't think there's much use in coming up with a list of the worst. Like the worst is, why do you need to waste your time? I'm not a person that likes to just spend a lot of energy ragging on things anyway. But I do think it is useful to talk about things that disappointed, things that you expected to be great and didn't live up. And oftentimes those things can still have been good. They just didn't live up to your lofty expectations for them,
Devindra, any opinion on Worst of the Year lists? Your thoughts?
Yeah.
Do you ever read these things? Do you ever make anything like that for Engadget?
It depends. For Engadget, a product I think is different than like a piece of art and like a movie. So like a product, if something just doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I can say that, and I give it a bad score or something. When it comes to the movie things, I feel like there's been a lot of discourse of people saying they really only want to talk about the positive side of things. And I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of value to talking about bad movies and why they're bad. I think you can be mean-spirited about it. I think you can do it in a really unconstructive way and maybe revel in how much you hate it. But I think there is a place for these. I just think most people probably don't go about it in the best ways.
Well, so I think Whitney Siebold made a really good point about this on Twitter. He says, quote, "As critics, we see piles and piles of movies, many of them bad. Lists let us blow off steam, reflect on the meaning of the bad art of the year, posit what those types of movies say about the health of the art form, and invite Hollywood to learn from its mistakes. When you read a best of list from a critic, it's implied they had to sift through a lot of chaff to find the wheat. To ignore the bad films is to not have a full conversation. It's not entirely a critic's job to proliferate positivity. Sure,
Yep.
the best part of our job is to find diamonds in the rough and share our passion, but equally important is surmising the consistency of the rough itself," end quote. Which I really like. Surmising the consistency of the rough. You're finding the diamonds in the rough. What is the rough like? I think that's a really, well put, articulate, eloquent point about the value of Worst of lists. But here's my problem with the Worst of lists. First of all, actually, before I even get to my problem with Worst of lists, the reason why this prompted so much debate was because Variety published a Worst of list, and I think a lot of people thought that list was pretty terrible. So this list is Pete DeBruge and Owen Gleiberman. And I would like you guys to react via, groan noises, whether you think this movie should be on the worst movie of the year list, okay? So just is like good, or is like you shouldn't have put that on the list, okay? All right, so this is Owen Gleiberman and Pete DeBruge. Here we go. Dumbo. What do you think? Should that be on the worst?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay. Glass.
How dare you?
No.
Loquisha.
I didn't
You
see
guys-
it.
Okay, yeah. Serenity, the Matthew McConaughey movie.
Oh yeah, that deserves it.
Okay, Yesterday.
Whoa, that's brutal. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean movie does not deserve to be on
Yeah.
the worst of the list. No.
Yeah. And then there's other choices on here too. We can stop doing the noise thing, but
Yeah.
Men in Black International, that deserves to be on there in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Rocket Man, Annabelle Comes Home. Here's my problem with Worst of the Year list is movies are generated at such a high clip these days. Like thousands of movies come out per year right now.
Right.
So the problem is with these worst of lists is the same problem as the Razzies. Is you're not choosing the actual worst movies of the year, because I guarantee you the worst movies of the year are movies most people have not heard of, right?
Some straight to video.
Some straight to video. They're movies that people like made on the iPhone, or they're movies that like people.
But that's why I think that the term "most disappointing" is maybe more useful. It feels like what we're judging is the delta between what we think it should have been versus how it turned out.
Yeah,
you know?
I think that's right, Jeff. I think the term "worst of the year" is a misnomer unless you are actually going to list like unwatchable movies. Like that that should be the bar, in my opinion, of like what a worst of the year list is unwatchable. Like
I've been to film school final project day.
It's like film school. Think like film school final project caliber is what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
So but
what they're really saying is you had something with the talent of Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway in it. It shouldn't have turned out as bad as Serenity, right? Like that's what they're saying. It was really bad based on the amount of talent you had and money that was spent in this film. That I'll buy, that I'll buy.
Well, but even that, though, Jeff, that is not how this list is framed. Even if you read the descriptions, it's not like, oh, wow, it should have been awesome, but it was not bad. It was not good. It's like, this is actually one of the worst movies of the year, right? In the case of Yesterday, he's like, there's no romantic chemistry, and I couldn't get past the concept of this insipid fantasy. So I think like that's my problem with worst of the year list. It's not that I think people shouldn't make them, because I agree with Whitney Seibold that like you should. There's value in describing why something is bad, and maybe there's something that it says about us as a society about like why movies are bad in this specific way, and there's a lot of them this year. So I think there is value there, but like the problem is I think that in some ways these worst of year lists are intellectually dishonest, right? Because they're not actually the worst of in my opinion. Like I think if you actually went out and looked for worst, you could easily find movies that were worse than these. So that's kind of my problem. But I thought it was an interesting conversation that happened this week as a result of Variety publishing that list. Wanted to talk with you folks about it. So that's an email from Logan from Atlanta.
We could just all agree that Serenity was bad, right?
I mean,
that's our takeaway.
Bad is a strong word, Jeff. I mean, I would argue that that's so bad it's good.
Oh,
Serenity,
no.
so bad it's
No,
good.
And then how do you judge that? Yeah. To me, that's a more fun list, by the way. The so bad it's good list. Yeah.
But Jeff does not agree with that. He thinks it's so bad it's bad. Mostly because it violated his opinions on like his sensibility on what a video. Well, actually, I can't even say what it is because it's a spoiler.
Yeah,
it's a spoiler.
It violated all my sensibilities. Is apt.
It's violated. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's talk about some what we've been watching. I want to talk briefly about what I've been watching this week. First of all, I watched the series finale of Silicon Valley. Now, do any of you care if I spoil the series finale of Silicon Valley?
Oh, I saw it. I just saw it. Yeah.
Jeff Kanata, do you care? What are your thoughts?
I mean, there's a part of me that thinks I'm going to eventually watch this, but I'm never going to watch it.
Let's just say spoilers for Silicon Valley series finale. I'll just say very briefly, I think that this show, at its best, has been a great lampooning of out-of-control startup culture.
Sure.
And has given us some very memorable moments, some of which involve Stephen Tobolowsky, friend of the show. And it reached extremely high highs and kind of seemed to dominate the culture for a bit, and fell prey to kind of not knowing how to like take the plot lines of the show and the characters forward, in my opinion. So many episodes were like, hey, we've gotten ourselves into an intractable problem, and a Deus Ex Machina solves it. Like very Entourage style in terms of like how plots were resolved on a weekly basis. And so that got to be quite disappointing. But I have to say, the ending of the show was great. I thought the series finale did honor to a lot of the characters. It brought it back down to the original, or as much of the original fivesome as was willing to participate, and really like kind of was funny and moving, and captured what made this show great in the first place. I thought it was a great ending. What do you think, Devindra?
I really enjoyed it. I feel like it is a lot of it felt a little neat in terms of like the conflict that arose in the finale, which seemed like a bigger deal than we initially thought. Like I feel like that's something you can kind of seed throughout the entire season in a
Right.
way, like build up that drama. It just seemed like this very, very terrible thing happened after they had some good news, which is something that happens a lot in this show. Like they can never really have a win. And I do kind of like that. Yeah, even at the end, they never really quite get that win, or the win is even too good. It's too good to actually be a win, basically. Yeah.
But I think you're right. It ups the stakes to literally apocalyptic levels, right?
Yeah.
And that
This escalated very quickly from the last episode. Yeah.
and it didn't really do anything to kind of seed that idea in earlier on. But I thought it was very funny, and it just was a great finale. It's like, wow, I don't know that they stuck the thing that comes before the landing, the pre-landing. I don't know that they stuck the pre-landing, but they really stuck the landing, in my opinion.
I
So
think this whole season has been pretty strong. I think stronger than some of the last few because they had to come in for the landing, which is certainly nice.
they can be more fearless in terms of what they do with the
Yeah.
characters, I think. And
I find it kind of funny that now that AT&T owns HBO, I guess like it's
well,
it is
it's
very
hilarious because AT&T
Yeah.
owns HBO. The basically the plot
Yes.
line involved like a kind of something terrible happening to AT&T, right? AT&T owns HBO, and also Richard Hendricks is a spokesperson for Verizon.
yes.
Right? So it's pretty hilarious that AT&T kind of gets the shaft in this episode.
Also, the very idea of Pied Piper is, decentralized internet. It was all about saying "fuck you" to the carriers because every device would create its own like network and talk to each other. So even the idea of them partnering with AT&T later on just seemed like, oh, why? That's like it doesn't. None of that makes sense. But okay, and I think the finale actually did a good job of not bringing that to conclusion, basically. Like that didn't actually work out for them, so I appreciated that.
Indeed. So that's Silicon Valley, the series finale. It's a great finale. I'm like a big fan of this finale, and
Can't wait to rewatch it from the beginning too. Like this is a show that was so tight. Like when it was good, it was very, very good.
first couple seasons excellent, so excellent. Really, like season 3, 4, maybe a bit of 5 got pretty wheel spinny. Pretty, like, hey, we're spinning our wheels. Things aren't really going anywhere in a way that was I found to be kind of frustrating. But they stuck the landing, and I think that really goes for a lot in this day and age. So that's Silicon Valley series finale. You can watch it right now on HBO. Which brings us to our first sponsor for the day. Jeff Canada, tell us about it.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about Lightstream. I'm a person that does not like to maintain debt on my credit card because I feel like, why do you want to have something cost more than it is? The APRs on credit cards can be insane. An interest rate of over 20% on some credit cards, nuts. And if you're carrying debt on your credit card, you got to get rid of it. It's just going to bog you down. And there's a way to do it with Lightstream. Lightstream wants to help you get a lower percentage rate. So maybe you can work off that debt. You can get a rate as low as 5.95% APR with AutoPay when you refinance your credit card balances and save with a credit card consolidation loan from Lightstream. You can get loans from $5,000 to $100,000 with no fees. There's no application fees, no origination fees, no transaction fees, no prepayment penalties. So get yourself out of debt, lower that percentage rate, and do it. And just for our listeners, you can apply now and get an additional interest rate discount. The only way to get that discount is to go to lightstream.com/filmcast. That's lightstream.com/filmcast for an additional discount. lightstream.com/filmcast. Subject to credit approval. Rate includes a 0.50% autopay discount. Terms and conditions apply, and offers are subject to change without notice. Visit lightstream.com/filmcast for more information.
All right, let's talk about something else I've been watching this week, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I first heard about this movie when Ben Pearson recommended it on Twitter, And Devindra, you watched this movie as well. How did you see this movie?
I saw it at the Angelica here. It was here for basically a limited run this week in New York. But I guess so. Was it over there? Same deal.
I actually was able to watch it on a screener disc, so
Okay.
I'm just curious. I believe it's out in limited release right now. The movie's portrait.
It's no, right now it's basically a week at I think maybe just the Angelica, maybe LA, but it's not actually going to be limited until like February or something.
I see.
It's gonna
be ultra limited release right now.
So I had to see it. I was like, okay, New York's hottest club is this theater. Yeah.
All right, so we shouldn't talk too much about it then because people haven't had a chance to watch it. But the movie's directed by Celine Sciamma. And it takes place at the end of the 18th century. It's about this woman named Marianne, a young painter, who is commissioned to do a painting of a young woman named Eloise, and that's basically the plot of the movie, at least as much as
but
we'll
do it
reveal
in
this
secret.
But do it in secret.
Like
She can't reveal that she's doing the painting. Yeah, so that's about as much as the plot as I think we should reveal on this show. But suffice to say, I thought this movie was excellent. I thought it was very beautiful. It's amazingly shot. Most of the movie takes place in kind of these extremely long takes, often where you have two characters in them, so you can really see like these characters bouncing off each other and react to each other in a way that feels very naturalistic. I think the costuming is impeccable. The artwork and the way they show the art being made is fascinating. It's beautiful. I really liked it. I found it compelling, very moving. Those are my thoughts on Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Devindra Hardawar, what did you think of it?
It's it's a gorgeous movie. It's sort of like it is in many ways a slow burn movie because you're slowly starting to see this relationship between these two women and the sort of like connection they form. But this movie is also filmed with such evocative imagery. Like even the poster gives away, I think, one of the most gorgeous shots of the film is just a woman standing in complete blackness and her dress is on fire from the bottom. And it's just, and her look is so, it is such a beguiling and interesting look. And so much of this movie is people looking at each other and not saying things, but, really trying to convey something. It reminds me a lot of Cold War, and sort of the like doomed nature of that movie, but maybe on another level. It's pretty heartbreaking, pretty beautiful. There's so many shots of this movie that I can't wait to see again. It is stunning.
Yeah. The movie is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. If you have a chance to check it out, do so.
Yeah, it's gonna be out on Valentine's Day actually, and it would be a perfect Valentine's Day movie.
Don't know if I agree there, but yeah, I mean, I really love the movie. You know what I've actually thought? The thought I had when I watched this movie, Devindra, is like this must be what people felt like when they said they liked Call Me by Your Name, which is a movie I was not a big fan of.
Yes, it is like a very mirror type of image movie of against Call Me by Your Name.
I just think like the direction of this movie, there's just so much to recommend it in my opinion.
Yes.
Which I didn't, Call Me by Your Name, I just thought was like visually a lot less interesting. The entire movie, Call Me by Your Name, was shot on, I think, a single lens, right? Which like gives it a very specific, almost documentary-like feel. And this movie is not like that, in my opinion. It's very much more deliberate with its compositions, and obviously you have the period piece costumes as well. So I just feel like there's just a lot. Like for me personally, I know a lot of people love Call Me by Your Name, but for me personally, there was a lot more for me to enjoy here in the Portrait of a Lady.
Yeah, I'll say the real star of Call Me by Your Name was like that gorgeous villa and the Italian countryside and everything. Like it did a good job of conveying beauty that way, even if its cinematic techniques weren't as involved as this movie. This movie has one shot that it's almost like it's like a ghostly apparition that kind of shocked me a little, like just seeing it happen so well. So I can't wait to talk more about this movie when more people can see it.
All right, well that's Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and I just want to say I saw Uncut Gems, and it was extremely good. It was extremely good. It is a contender for my top 10 of the year.
How uncut were those gems?
Actually, shockingly uncut, as we're going to talk about in a future episode of the Slashfilmcast. Like uncut to a degree that would surprise you, and I'm being 100% serious. So, Devindra, what have you been watching this week?
I also finally got to see The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which is the debut feature by Joe Talbot, starring two indie actors, Jimmy Fails and Jonathan Majors, and it's partially based on Jimmy Fails' life about, I believe, trying to reclaim a house that his family had owned in San Francisco. And it's a story of two black men basically trying to find their place in a city that's quickly moving past them. And this movie is gorgeous. It's fascinating. I think it is a great reflection of what it is to love a place in a city. One conversation they have in this movie at some point against some gentrifiers who are talking about like how much they hate San Francisco. And this main character, played by Jimmy Fails, basically says, you have to love a place to hate it. And that made, I found that to be really interesting in terms of at least a place. Like to truly hate something, you have to have some love for it. You have to know what you've lost. And I found that to be a really fascinating description of, I don't know, life in San Francisco, certainly now for residents who don't have as much a place in that city compared to like the tech bros and the millionaires out there. Honestly, I'm thinking like that line just kind of hit me too, because I'm thinking about like the idea of maybe eventually leaving New York. And so much of it is, I really love this city, but it is unsustainable for me in many ways because it's very hard to raise a kid in New York. And I just wish it wasn't the case. It's sort of like wanting to be somewhere where you are unloved and like basically unsupported. It's such an interesting balance. This movie is gorgeous. It's incredible. Go check it out. It is streaming on Amazon Prime now, so it's pretty easy to watch.
All right. That is The Last Black Man in San Francisco, and it is streaming right now. Jeff Kanata, what have you been watching this week?
Well, I wanted to watch. It was Thursday night, and I wanted to sit down. The wife was going to sleep early, and I'm like, I'm going to stay up and watch myself a movie. And I wanted to watch that Marriage Story because I've heard such amazing things, chiefly from you, Dave, last week. And you said, hey, only watch that when your wife is, not in the same room. So I was all set to do it. Loaded up the old Netflix. I'm like, that's weird. It's not in my any of my menus here. I'm going to search for it. What? Even if I put in the first word, it doesn't come up. It's got all these other marriage movies. All right, Marriage Story. There it is. Oh, it doesn't come out till tomorrow. Oh, can't watch that. But now I'm itching to watch a movie. So what did I do? See, I loaded up that old AMC Stubbs A-List app on the phone.
Nice.
I was like, hey, I don't know if you guys know this, but I live across the street from a movie theater. So it was super easy for me to just hop over there with that AMC Stubbs A-List, see if there's any late night movies playing, like a 10:20, 10:30 showing. What did I see? I saw The Good Liar, which is the new Bill Condon joint with Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen. I love me some McKellen and Mirren. I am a Anglophile. I am an old Shakespeare actor and fan, and I have studied at the feet of tapes of those actors playing the great Shakespearean roles, all the RSC tapes and RADA tapes. So I'm a huge fan of them, and they can pretty much get me into the door to see anything, which is exactly what happened for The Good Liar.
Because there's no other reason you would see this film, basically. Right?
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And certainly no reason for anyone to go into a big movie theater to see it. I was the only person in my screening at 10:30 on a Thursday night.
Nice.
Shockingly. But seeing them work, watching them work is delightful. They are skillful actors, and they bring their A game, as they always do, to this material as well. Not sure the material justified it, but I guess
so the trailer made it look Hitchcockian, Jeff. Was it Hitchcockian?
Well, here's what I thought I was getting myself into. This is a Good Liar, right? This is a movie about con artists. I love con artists. I love a good con game movie. We talked that on the Knives Out episode, we talked about how fun a good, parlor murder mystery is. Love those. If there's something I like even more than a good parlor murder mystery, it's a con movie. I'm into it. Love con artists, love con, there's figuring those out, being fooled myself. Thought that's what I was getting myself into. Not so much. This movie takes a real turn in the third act, because for the first two acts, you are hanging out with a charming British couple that have found each other. You get the sense that there's some stuff going on, because there's some weird other things happening, especially with Ian McKellen's character. You get the feeling that he's kind of running a con a little bit. And then the movie's like, no, It's not so much about that. It's about something way darker than that, and way less fun. And
I'm sorry, Jeff. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if you guys know what the big twist
No,
is. In
I
this
don't.
movie.
I don't.
No,
So don't
no.
reveal
Yeah.
it.
It's yeah, yeah.
Now I really want to see
Yeah.
it.
Now you've made me really want to see it, Jeff. So.
Okay, you're welcome.
Should I want to see it?
It's not a bad movie. It's perfectly watchable, and the talent that they bring to it. I mean, Condon's a good director. It's just like, oh, this is where we're going. Oh, here. Okay, all right, that's what we're doing. And you could totally see that this was a novel. Like it feels so much like a book. Like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. This is that chapter where that happens. All right. So I didn't particularly enjoy it, not just because of that turn. It just never. It's a little bit of a lifeless movie. It just doesn't have any zip to it, even with the talent on display and these actors bringing a little zip of their own. And there's a glimmer in their eyes. And the first act of this movie is kind of a little like, what do they call it? A sunset love story. It's like a late in their life couple that find each other late in life. And that's kind of fun. We're having a little bit of fun. But then this movie is like, there's no fun allowed anymore. No fun allowed. Yeah, The Good Liar, it was a bit of a disappointment for me. I
Did
just
it
didn't
lie to
feel,
you, Jeff?
I guess so. Maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe should
Truly
have
the
called
greatest
it the, like,
liar. Yeah.
Yeah. If you look to your left, look to your right.
Maybe
don't see a liar.
The Good Liar was the movie's advertising.
I didn't see any of the advertising. I just saw the cast list. Yeah, it's more aptly named the Fine Liar. It's fine. It's Fine Liar.
All right. Well, that's a Good Liar. It's out in theaters right now. Jeff, what else have we been watching this week?
Well, my wife and I stuck with The Morning Show on Apple TV, and this is the star-studded, absolutely star-studded Apple TV show. Jennifer Aniston, Reese Witherspoon, Billy Crudup, Mark Duplass, Steve Carell. I mean, it is just star-studded, and it's about a morning show like Good Morning America or something like that. I mean, it really is basically about what's his name? Was the guy that got that was having
Steve
Matt
Carell?
Lauer?
Huh?
Oh, Matt Lauer.
Matt Lauer.
Yeah.
Matt Lauer. Yeah, it's basically about Matt Lauer.
Yes.
And 8 episodes. This show is like just good enough that I didn't want to stop watching it. I was like, we'll see this through. But it's really not as good as it should be. It really wants to be Newsroom, right? It really feels like it's Newsroom. But Newsroom is about the news, right? It's about...
Yeah. It was about real news, like reflexively looking at real news, yeah.
Well, it also is about, in a very Sorkin-y way, which is, my bread and butter. I eat it up like candy. It's about the smartest people in the world being smart and doing the best they can do at a job that matters. And this show kind of thinks it's that, but the whole time you're like, this is a morning show. So like, not to take anything away from morning
Millions
shows,
of people wake up to this, Jeff.
Yes,
Come on.
I'm sure
their work matters.
I have no doubt they are difficult to make, and I have no doubt a lot of people get their news from them, but also, they're not, it's not.
I guess I shouldn't pitch you my new TV idea, the podcast show, Jeff.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Yeah.
In the morning. We only record in the mornings, yeah.
Yeah. But, these are charming people, charming actors that are fun to watch. And I think Jennifer Aniston does a great job. I had a real problem with the Reese Witherspoon character. Boy, she's grating. Not the actress, but just the character and the whole idea behind the character is super grating. And it really becomes the centerpiece of the show until the last episode. And Reese Witherspoon is not in the last episode. And the last episode is by far the best episode of the series. And it is a complete outlier for the rest of the series. I guess it's a tiny spoiler. You might want to skip ahead 15 seconds if you plan on watching the morning show. But I will say the last episode is completely a flashback. So if the show was all about that, the show starts as the fallout for what you see in episode 8, really. And it's so much more interesting. Like, let's start there. It's so much more interesting to see it happen in real time. And I think it has such more life to it, and there's no Reese Witherspoon character in that episode. And it's a weird way to end the show. It's a weird way to end the season because you have like episode 7 is not the end of the story. They've already greenlighted a second season, so we're going to see more of that story. But then like episode 8 is just completely a flashback episode. So it's very odd. It's very odd. But I will say this whole show, I think, is worth watching for Billy Crudup. Billy Crudup in the show you can't take your eyes off him. He's so good. He plays this kind of like smug, smarmy executive character, and he does it with aplomb. He does it with such a center of gravity that's incredible. I love watching him in the show. He's amazing, and I keep going like, what is he doing? What does he do? How is he creating that just completely owning every scene he's in thing? Like it doesn't matter what the other character is in the scene. He is completely in command. He's standing there. He's smiling.
He is playing the smartest guy in the room. Like, he is that guy. He is such a Sorkin character for sure. Yeah.
Right. I loved watching him work in this. I'm like, Crudup, man, he needs to be in more stuff. He's so good. But the whole cast they're charming people, and it's a very watchable show, and it really wants to be about Me Too. It really feels like the whole reason the show is made is because it wants to be of the moment and in the moment. And it has
just to clarify, like Me Too was originally not a plot point in the show, but then during the making of the show, it obviously became something they had to address. So like
that's the entire show is about it.
Right. No,
it is the complete raison d'etre for the show.
Correct, but that's why I wanted to clarify, because you're saying like, oh, it was made because of Me Too, when in fact it predated Me Too, and then they had to kind of shoehorn Me Too into it. Although I think based on what you're saying is you find that the shoehorning was convincing.
Man, I'm shocked to hear it was shoehorned. It feels like a page 1 rewrite. This feels like, oh, we're making a show about Me Too now. I mean, literally every character in it is through the lens of Me Too. It is the B story, C story. They're all about that. It is the show is about that. I mean, it is showing you different versions of inappropriate relationships, and it's showing you, like, are we okay thinking that all of these are painted with the same brush, right? There's two characters in the show that have a genuine romance, but there's a power differential dynamic, and you go, well, that's kind of okay. And then they shows you the bad one, and you're like, well, that's not okay. And then the show kind of asks you why you feel that way. I mean, the entire thing is about that. So it's not. It's shocked to me that it doesn't feel shoehorned. It feels like it is the orbit around which the whole show,
So according to Jennifer Aniston in the Variety, she says the show got picked up. We sold it to Apple with an outline. Then about 4 months later, the whole shit hit the fan, and basically we had to start from scratch.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, yeah. So, but it sounds like overall, you actually enjoyed watching the show. Is that right, Jeff? The morning show.
I did. I mean, it felt like it didn't feel like a home run, and it didn't feel like a show that I couldn't miss. But I was like, 8 episodes, I'll stick with this. It certainly, there's money on the screen in this show, man. It is a very expensive looking show, and there's a sequence in the middle of it where they go and they cover the fires in Los Angeles, and it's like, wow, money was spent on this show. And so just kind of that is compelling, and in seeing a very cinematic hour-long TV show. It's just not completely. It's hard because you constantly compare it to Sorkin, and it's just not in that league at all.
Well, that is The Morning Show, and it's available right now on Apple TV Plus. I assume you got the free year, Jeff. That's how you watched it, right?
I got the free year because of my phone.
What was it? You bought a new phone, right? Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I got that. I got that new phone with the 3 cameras.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Jeff, why don't we get to our next sponsor?
Sure. Just before I do that, though, I just want to say it is hilarious how often Apple products are in this show. It is wall-to-wall, nonstop Apple products, and authentically so. I could imagine everyone on a show like that would have a Mac and have an iPhone and an iPad and an Apple Watch, but it's like you go, oh, when it's on the Apple channel, on the Apple app, you feel like, yeah, you see what you're doing.
I can't wait until the Apple Medical Show, by the way, when like an Apple Watch, it's just like how the Apple Watch saves lives.
Yeah. It detected the heartbeat, like every single week detecting the heartbeat was the key to success. Yeah. It's crazy how people, put products in things. Anyway, now on to our sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, if I had one wish this holiday season, it would be that you, through the power of podcasting, could smell me. If we could figure out smelling, the sense of smell through a podcast.
I do dream of that day, Jeff.
Right?
Yes.
Don't we all? Don't you want to be sitting here listening to the Slash Filmcast and going, God, I wish I could smell them. If you could, you would smell my deodorant, which is Native, which is our sponsor, because I'm wearing it right now. Why? Because it smells real good. It smells real good. What is Native? Native is a company that creates safe, simple, effective products that people use in the bathroom every day. They create products with trusted ingredients and trusted performance. They have over 9,000 five-star reviews from customers. What I like about Native is simple ingredients, very few ingredients compared to a lot of deodorants. They say their ingredients are found in nature, like coconut oil, shea butter, tapioca starch. I don't know about all that stuff. All I know is it smells real good. I have a couple of different ones now. Their most popular scent is called coconut and vanilla, which you go, do I want to smell like that? You do. Trust me. If only there was a way you could smell me, you would know. I actually smell right now like the cucumber and mint, which is the one I just got and have been using. If you could smell me, you would recognize it's real good because I like it. I would never in a store go, oh, I want the cucumber and mint deodorant because I don't know. That doesn't. How do I know what that smells like? It smells like you would want to eat me. No, it smells delightful. It is so fresh and wonderful. So give it a try. There's no risk to try. They offer free returns and exchanges in the U.S. Native does. And we're going to hook you up with a discount for 20% off your first purchase. Visit nativedeodorant.com and use promo code FILMCAST during checkout. That is nativedeodorant.com, promo code FILMCAST for 20% off your first purchase. Give it a shot. Check it out. It's a delightful thing. If I could just let you smell me, I would, but I can't. So you got to try it. No risk to try. Get that 20% off. nativedeodorant.com, promo code FILMCAST.
All right. Before we get to our review, we want to thank all the people who donated to the podcast this week. Thanks to Nelson Wong for subscribing at the rate of $2 per month. And thanks also to donors Julian Gray and Brett Chalupa for their one-time donations. We also got a donation from Paul Mizzy from Adelaide, Australia, who writes in, hey guys, just want to say thank you. David Chen's podcast, and especially the Slash Filmcast, have been a huge inspiration for starting my own podcast. I decided to dedicate a podcast to the niche subgenre that is body swap films. Since launching this insane concept, which we call the Swapcast podcast, the show has been featured on the AV Club, joined a major podcast network, and today Apple has deemed us new and noteworthy. It's been hugely satisfying doing something creative that has resonated with people, and I owe a big part of that to you guys, so I wanted to donate something to show my gratitude. Keep up the great work, and if you ever need an expert guest on a body swap film, you know where to find him. So that's Paul from the Swapcast podcast.
Hey, Dave, what does it feel like when someone is inspired by you and then wildly outstrips your success?
I mean, I gotta say, it feels great, Jeff. It feels great. No regrets. No regrets.
Do you kind of wish, though, like a little bit that you could just body swap with him just a little bit?
I will say this, though. You know what, Paul? If we ever review a body swap movie, I will contact you. Are there any body swap movies coming up in the near future? I don't think so, right?
I think you'd have to ask Paul. I don't
Avatar,
know.
Maybe? Avatar
Does that
2?
count? I don't know if that counts.
Yeah, I don't know if that counts. Yeah. Anyway, thanks.
We're talking like Freaky Friday.
Yeah, I know what a body swap movie is, Jeff.
I'm telling the audience in case they don't, We're talking like, what? Name, how many of them can you name? There's one with Judge Reinhold.
The Jason Bateman one with Ryan Reynolds. The Change Up, I think, right?
Yeah. 30 going on 13, or 13 going on 30.
Yeah.
Judge Reinhold. There's one with George Burns from my youth.
Yeah, no, I got nothing. I
Come
bet
on.
if we go to the Swapcast podcast page, every episode's probably entitled one movie. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So that's what you should do if you want to learn more about body swap movies.
Yeah, I guess so.
And on that note, we should also say, hey, we never want you to donate if it in any way causes you hardship. We'd love it if you just left a review for us or a 5-star rating. That'd be great. But if you do want to throw some cash our way, it really does help. And, of course, we really value it, especially in the holiday season. You can go to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/the-word-filmcast if you want to donate to us. That's going to do it for what we've been watching, for donations, for emails. Let's get to our review of The Irishman.
And the show's going to get way better now because there's a professor coming on. Just so you know.